Welcome to another video by Day Night Gaming. Hello, so I'm going to do something a bit different today. I'm just going to showcase playing my Paladin in a normal dungeon when I am playing casually. Now before we begin, I'm going to eat a high quality stuffed Highland cabbage. And this is really good because it gives 215 vitality and 101 critical hit, as well as 168 determination. So as a friendly reminder, always make sure to have your tank stance up. I always try to check this every time I enter an instance. The reason for this, every time you sink and your level changes, your buff will drop off. So whenever I pull a mob pack, I always try to hit Total Eclipse into Prominence combo, and a good way to check to make sure you hit every mob is if their name changes color. After doing so, you're free to move on and pull the next pack. And as you can see, I'm going to use Sprint so I can create some distance between me and the pack I just pulled. And here I'm going to do Total Eclipse into Prominence again to make sure I grab the new pack as well. And then I'm going to use Circle of Scorn to put a dot on top of everyone. And of course I'm going to use my Rampart in order to give me a defensive buff in order to cut down the amount of incoming damage that the enemies are doing. Now I'm going to activate Retroscat and go into a AoE magic rotation, which is going to be 4 holy circles and ending with a Confiteor, which is a large burst of AoE damage. And also at the same time I'm going to activate a Sheltron. And now with this pack dead, we can go ahead and move on to the next grouping since the doors will be open. Also, it's important to take note that you have to watch the HP of the monsters that you're fighting when considering if you should be using cooldowns or not, which is why after I did the magic rotation, I made sure to hold on to my Circle of Scorn and save it for the next pack. This is also important to take note of when you're using your defensive cooldowns, because if there's only going to be 1 or 2 seconds left in the fight, you don't want to be popping any of your big defensive cooldowns. Now if you take note, red arrows appeared out of the Agilufo and arced above me toward the other teammates of my party. So at this point I know that my teammates are targeted by the enemy and I have to make sure I grab the aggro from them. So I'm going to position myself so that I hit both of them with my Total Eclipse and Prominence. After I'm sure that I have aggro on all the enemy targets, I will then go into my magic AoE rotation. Also notice that I popped Sentinel as well as Sheltron earlier in the fight while I was doing my attacking, because both of those are off the global cooldown just like Rampart and any other defensive cooldown. Basically every time I pull a multi-pack, I always try to double up on a defensive cooldown at the beginning of the fight, as this will allow the healer more breathing room so that they can also squeeze in some DPS of their own. Now I'm gonna try and do Fast Blade into Riot Blade since there's only one enemy left. And with the boss in the next room, I'm going to try and hold on to this combo so that I can quickly move into a Goring Blade right on the boss. And if you noticed, I activated my Strength Potion as well as my Fight or Flight and used Intervene in order to gap close to the boss as fast as possible. Luckily, Intervene does not interrupt combos, so I was able to land a Goring Blade dot on the boss. At the same time, while I was executing that combo, the boss started using Dark Shock, which is the boss's tank buster. So I activated Rampart and Sheltron to minimize the amount of damage. Since I started with a hot loaded Goring Blade at the start of the fight, and I just now reapplied Goring Blade, I'm going to activate Retroscat so that I can still have a damage uptime, even though this should be a dodging phase. So now I'm going to relocate to the west side of the battlefield while still DPSing the boss, because Retrocast removes the channeling cast time of my spells. After doing so, I'm going to intervene to re-engage into the fight and begin my melee rotation. Speed is very important because if timed right, I should have my magic rotation ready to go during the dodging phase again, just like previously. So as you can see here, even though the movement was awkward, I tried my best to prioritize the safety of my melee DPS teammate and moved my AoE circle farther away, because even though a paladin would want to maximize their own DPS, a true melee teammate's DPS will always outshine a tank. And once again, to help minimize the damage from the incoming Shadow Bolt tank buster, I use Sentinel and Sheltron, doubling up my defensive cooldowns. So as you can see here, the timing lined up and I'm able to use my Retroscat just in time for the dodging phase to start. So while I move toward my safe location, I'm still going to be DPSing the boss with ranged magic spells. Sadly, at this point in time, there's no safe location for me to intervene into, so I'm going to have to shield lob a couple times, because some DPS is better than no DPS. And then once it's safe, I'm going to maneuver into melee range and start off my melee rotation. And now that the area is safe around the boss, I'm going to re-engage back in and prepare to apply my Goring Blade dot, starting with Fast Blade into Riot Blade and then into Goring Blade. But because the boss is almost dead, I'm going to consider saving my defensive cooldowns, because even though bosses can hit hard, the damage that they output in dungeons is much less than the amount of incoming damage multiple packs of enemy pulls can deal, especially since bosses are tuned to deal damage in a predictable manner and tends to only spike with telegraphed tank busters. Now as the tank, I try my best to minimize the amount of steps that I perform when navigating from pack to pack. So as you can see here, I'm going to jump off the ledge to help speed up this run even by a few seconds, while also making sure that I am the first party member that the enemy pack will target. Please take note that when pulling multiple packs at the start of the fight, your HP may take a huge dip, but do not be alarmed. Because the rest of the party must follow behind you, the healer has not had a chance to catch up to you yet. Watch your mini-map. Make sure there are 3 blue dots behind you. Believe in your defensive cooldowns and believe in your healer. It's important for a tank to understand, because he is the center of the monster's attention, that a tank's duty is to take damage for the team. So it is important that the tank realizes that it's okay to not be topped off. It's okay to even drop below 50%. Now that this pack is finished, notice that I'm at 40% HP, and the healer decided it was best to use regen to top me off, which is fine, but as a tank, make sure to manually deactivate the regen buff before aggroing the next enemy pack. Failing to do so will result in the healer taking all the aggro from all the incoming enemies, because that regen will tick before you have a chance to grab aggro. Remember, just like how you as a tank should put your faith in the healer, they too are trusting you to take care of them. So always pay attention to aggro, even when not engaged with an enemy. With this pull, I'm going to showcase how powerful arm's length is. What it does is it creates a barrier, nullifying most knockback and drawn effects, which is great for a lot of boss battles. But it also applies a barrier to the user that applies a 20% attack speed slow debuff to any enemy that attacks you that is susceptible to this type of debuff. When pulling multiple groups of enemies, this is one of the most powerful defensive skills a tank can use. But because it has a long recast timer, it's important to note that you want to use it once you reach your destination and once all the enemies are within range to attack you. So it's important not to use it while you're still pulling from camp to camp, but instead to wait until it's time to fight. Storm of Color is this boss's tank buster, so I'm gonna double up on my defensive cooldowns using Sheltron and Reprisal. And the nice thing about Reprisal is it has a really short cooldown, so it's the easiest to rotate into your defensive cooldowns. In case you're wondering, Reprisal has a 1-minute cooldown with a 10-second duration. Rampart has a 90-second cooldown with a 20-second duration, and Sentinel has a 2-minute cooldown with a 15-second duration. Now if you notice with that direct seedling, I still had enough time to apply my Goring Blade dot before I went to go grab the seed. And that's because this boss is perfectly timed, so that when pulling the boss initially, you can start off with Fast Blade and not have to hot load a Riot Blade pre-pull. And as you can see, I had ample enough time to bring the seed to a brown battle square, thus successfully satisfying the battle mechanic for this phase of the fight. So the second direct seedling that this boss will use will add another mechanic in which push arrows will be placed on the map with a random direction, with either east or west being the choices. After the seeds get displaced on the map, each player needs to wait until they see which direction the arrows are going, because when the seed gets placed back on the battlefield, the arrows will move everything on the battlefield in that direction. Luckily, this gives the Paladin the perfect timing window to apply a Goring Blade dot before running to pick up the seed. So as you're going to notice, after the direct seedling, he's going to use Gardener's Hymn, and during that time I'll apply Goring Blade, go pick up the seed that was placed on the battlefield. And for directional orientation, please take note that I am looking south. The arrows are moving from east to west, which means all the seeds will move toward the east, and that they will move approximately 1 square. Now at this point in time, the boss should be almost dead, so I'm going to be trying to save my defensive cooldowns so that I can use them on the multi-pack pulls after the boss. Now in the event that you as a tank and a melee DPS both end up being on the same safe spot of the map, but end up overlapping AoE circles on each other, it's okay for the tank to run to the next safe location, because remember, the boss will be following you anyway. So by doing this, both you as the tank as well as the melee will still be within range to attack the monster. But if that's not the case, you can always rely on shield lob or your magic spells to keep up your uptime. So always try to prioritize the DPS of your teammates over your own sustained DPS, because they will always deal more damage than you can. So once again, I'm going to showcase how powerful Arm's Length is. You're going to notice once the fight starts, I'll be receiving quite a lot of damage real quickly in the beginning. But once the enemies incur the slow debuff, you will notice that the healer requires very little effort to keep me healed during the duration of Arm's Length. But even though Arm's Length is very strong, I still always double up on my defensive cooldowns. In this case, it's Rampart and Sheltron. And as the enemies dwindle in numbers, I make sure to save my defensive cooldowns for the next pack of enemies. Because remember, as stated earlier, a tank doesn't need to be topped off. It's okay to have a little bit of damage on you, especially since you will heal in between pulls. As the tank of a dungeon, you dictate the speed at which the whole party goes through a dungeon. And you want to find places wherever you can cut your time down. And the last thing as a tank that you would want is to not have access to defensive cooldowns at the start of a multi-pack pull. Because the harder the healer has to work in order to keep you alive, the harder it will be for them to find time to squeeze in DPS of their own. Also take note that since the tank is the one with all the enemies aggro, it is the tank's job to maneuver the enemies in such a way that the DPS can apply the highest amount of damage that they can do. With that in mind, please remember that oftentimes enemies with range attacks tend to be stationary unless they need to move so that they can get in range of their attacks. So if the tank needs, they might need to overextend their pull beyond the enemy targets and then reposition so that all the enemies can be clumped up together in a more centralized location. This will allow the DPS to contribute more with their AoE attacks. Due to the nature of Total Eclipse and Prominence's AoE values, when there are 3 or more targets on the battlefield, they can yield a high amount of damage. But once there becomes less than 3 targets, the total amount of damage applied becomes less and less favorable. Keep in mind that Total Eclipse has a potency of 120 and Prominence has a potency of 320 when comboed. So if you're hitting 2 targets, the combo will total 880 potency, which will still beat out a Fast Blade into Riot Blade on one target. But if you have time to deal 6 weapon skills in a row, going from Fast Blade into Royal Authority and ending with 3 Atonements, that single target rotation alone will deal 2,900 potency, as opposed to doing 3 rotations of the AoE combo, which will yield 2,640. So the Paladin must assess how much HP is left on the targets. So if those 2 targets are almost dead, then it's still better to continue on doing the AoE rotation 1 or 2 times. But if they have enough life to go 3 AoE rotations, then you're better off doing 1 single target DPS rotation. That same rule does not apply to the magic rotation. Requiescat into 4 holy circles and ending with Confiteor, even with only 2 targets to hit, will always beat out a single rotation of the single target melee rotation. It is because of this that under all circumstances, when it comes to AoEing multiple monsters, being able to use Requiescat should always be the highest priority, and then going into 4 holy circles and ending with Confiteor. Now we're at the final boss of the Grand Cosmos, and fighting this boss is actually very awkward for a paladin. So there are actually 2 ways to fight this boss. One way is to maximize DPS by having everyone stay within melee range during the dashing phase and just incur a vulnerability stat. That way everyone can have complete uptime on the boss. But for purposes of this video, I'll be showing you the safe method, and I do this whenever I notice that my main healer has under 100k HP. And as a personal preference, I like to fight orientated toward the east side for the first mortal flame, which is the blue arrows. It's important to note that you want to take out the east side furniture first, starting with the velvet drapery, and if possible save the west side furniture, piano, and drapery for the second mortal flame. By doing this, you allow the complete east side to be safe to get hit by red fire. Now if you notice, I've been delaying the use of Requiescat and holding on to my magic rotation, and that's because now I'm going to be using it to try and maintain as much uptime as possible during the dashing phase, because generally the boss will be moving quite quickly across the map at a rate in which the Paladin cannot keep up and stay within melee range. So Requiescat removes the channeling cast timer when casting spells. So this gives us both range and mobility at the same time, allowing us to go into safe locations of the map. After the dashing phase finishes, I'm going to maneuver to the east windows where the east drapery used to be, and I'm going to move toward the northeasternmost window. And the reason for that is when the crystal chandeliers fall down, standing in this location will protect the most amount of furniture when otherworldly heat activates. This also allows the party to quickly get to furniture when the second phase of Mortal Flame happens. The other benefit to this location is just in case your party members accidentally place a scorching heat line marker on any of the chandeliers, they should still have some furniture on the west side that was originally there, like the piano, the plush sofas, or the west side curtain, thus giving your party more than enough furniture for them to remove their Mortal Flame debuff. And it's little minute choices that can really diversify a Paladin's playstyle and thus keeping the job interesting at all times. Due to the nature of aggro in this game, the main tank can dictate both the flow of the battle as well as the positioning of the monster, and for me it makes it highly satisfying. So now that there's been 2 Mortal Flame activations, you don't have to worry about furniture anymore. So at this point the tank can pretty much tank wherever they want. And at this point we'll take note that the alternative way to doing this fight is in dashing phases like this, a party with high eye level can forgo splitting up and instead stay in melee range and get hit by short range dash attacks by the boss and incur the vulnerability stacks. And if that's the case, the Paladin doesn't have to delay their magic rotation phase and just go with the standardized Paladin rotation the whole time. For the maximum amount of uptime, this will definitely yield much higher DPS results, not just for the tank but for everyone involved, but it also will make healing for the healer much more difficult. Just make sure to assess everyone's gear, especially the healers, before you make the decision to do this strategy, because while this may speed up the boss fight by 5 to 10 seconds, maybe 20 seconds at most, in the off chance that there's a TPW or a total party wipeout, that will set back the whole dungeon run by 5 to 10 minutes, because not only will you have to refight the fight, but you'll also have to rerun back to the boss. Pretty much home free from here on out. So just try to maximize your DPS and then get ready to collect loot. I just wish I could give everyone commendations at the end of the dungeon run, because I had a fun time in this dungeon, and I really wish I could let everyone in my party know that I really appreciated playing with them and that it was a great run. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider smashing that thumbs up button. Hit that subscribe and ring that bell for notifications on future videos that I might be posting. And until next time, take care. Goodbye.